of course, this past Easter weekend was pretty dry, even after some thunderstorms that we had that rolled through the area on Friday. We also had temperatures that were much cooler. Well, now we're going to see temperatures on a little bit of an increase over the next several days, and our dry weather that we've had this weekend is not going to stick around for very long. Looking at the national weather alerts here that we have across the country, you'll notice that really overall, we're not looking too bad. Of course, we've got some wind alerts here in Montana, bit of a fire risk that we're going to be dealing with today across the Central Plains, and then some of that cooler temperatures across the eastern portion of the U.S., still leading to some frost and freeze alerts here. So that's something that we're going to be watching over the next day or so as our temperatures continue to rebound for those areas that most recently saw that cold front move through the area. So that's what we're looking at. But overall, things are pretty clear when we look at the different weather alerts here across the country. Taking a look here at Tropical Tidbits' GFS run of what we're going to be dealing with as we go through this week from a national perspective, you'll notice that we are going to continue to see dry times as we go through today. But then as we go into tonight, actually, something that we're going to be dealing with, we're going to have a very quick system that is going to move through, and some light rain or snow is going to be possible into early Tuesday morning. Now, that being said, temperatures, of course, have been well above freezing today and will continue to be above freezing tonight. So we are not expecting any accumulation if we were to see any snow. And really, that's even a big if. So again, the chances for snow are very small at this point in time, and the chances of accumulation are slim to none at this point in time. As far as impacts to travel, there will be absolutely pretty much zero. I mean, the roads might get a little bit wet like we would see during, rain, but it's not going to be anything too significant. So that is not going to be a big deal. It's just something that you might notice as you go into your morning commute tomorrow. Now, as far as how rare is it for us to see April snow? Well, here in Missouri, we actually average about 0.2 inches of snow here in Columbia every single year. And so it's not entirely uncommon. We've actually had 49 instances of accumulating snow that have been reported here in Columbia. And then we've had, or excuse me, 47 instances. And then we've had 9 reports in Nevada. And as far as the latest snow we've ever had in Columbia, that was on April 20th, which would be 2 weeks from today. So again, it certainly can happen, but it is a little bit uncommon in this situation, though, not expecting any accumulation. So that, of course, is some really good news. Then as we go through the majority of the rest of the week, things are going to be dry. As we get into Thursday and Friday, though, things are going to start to change. So the late part of the week, we're going to be dealing with some showers and even some thunderstorms as we go Thursday into Friday. And so that is where our severe weather risk will increase. So we've had several days without thunderstorms, but that will be changing as we go towards the later part of this week, as the active stretch of this pattern will be returning here across the Central Plains. And then we'll also be dealing with some precipitation out west as we go towards the end of the week, which is very much needed across that region as well. This wet pattern will continue into the weekend and even into next week. Let's break this down by region. So we're going to start off by looking at our regional forecast out west. Things are going to start off pretty dry for the early part of the week. Then we'll get some rain and snow chances. Here's on your Wednesday. So a little bit of rain and snow across Wyoming and Montana, not a really big deal. But then you'll notice that rain and snow begins to increase out west as we go into Thursday and Friday, especially into Saturday and Sunday as well. And so how much snowfall are we going to be looking at? This is through Saturday morning. Not a whole lot. So again, a little bit of snow in the higher elevations, but temperatures are still unseasonably warm. So not really a whole lot as far as accumulation goes for snow. As far as rainfall amounts go, some areas could pick up an inch of rain. So it certainly is going to be, it's needed across this region, but we're not going to get a whole lot of it. So of course, we'll take whatever rain we can get across this region, but realistically, this is not going to have that much of an impact. So that's good news because we won't be dealing with flooding. Bad news because it's not really going to fix our drought that we have. All right, then we'll go into the central U.S., including us here in Missouri. So some rain and snow from a couple of weak systems. Those are going to be passing by, including that one tonight into tomorrow morning that's going to move in across northern Missouri. For a lot of us, this will probably be rain, light snow, or for a lot of us, it probably won't be anything at all. And so that's the reason why we're not really concerned about this at this point in time. Again, a passing shower or snow flurry is going to be possible as we go into Tuesday morning, but no impacts to travel will be expected. And then things stay dry as we go into Wednesday, but then Wednesday night into Thursday, that's when our rain chances will be picking up, maybe even some thunderstorms as we go towards the end of this week. So, of course, it is going to be a dry start to the week with mild temperatures, but then things are going to change as we get towards the end of this week with, again, pretty heavy rainfall amounts as we go through the weekend. Not necessarily, we're not going to necessarily have rain all the time, but we are going to have chances for rain just about every single day as we go into the weekend here. So again, we talked about the possibility for snow, but it's very unlikely at this point in time. We haven't seen any so far in the month of April, but again, we do average about 2/10 of an inch of snow here in Columbia. And again, it has happened 9 times, so it is possible in Nevada. It's just average, there's no accumulation. There was some light snow that fell on April 20th in 2021. That was the last instance of snow that we had in both Nevada and Columbia. Columbia picked up about an inch, and then Nevada picked up about a dusting out of that. So that was the last time we really had snow during the month of April. But again, we're not really expecting this one to be a big deal. As far as rainfall totals, of course, we had quite a bit this past week. This does not include Friday's rainfall totals, as these have not been added in yet. So we're still waiting for that to come in. So as of right now, through April 2nd, we've had about 8.5 inches of rain here in Nevada, and then about 8 inches there in Columbia. So again, we're definitely closing in on where we should be for this time of year. And we've already had about half of the average amount of rainfall that we would see during the entire month in the first 2 days there in Nevada. We're forecasting a couple of inches of rain in Nevada, a little bit heavier totals expected as we get closer to Columbia. And as far as snowfall and rainfall totals across the region, again, snow staying mostly to our north, but a couple inches cannot be ruled out with some weak systems across the northern tier of the country, and then maybe a light dusting as we go here across northern Missouri. The weather prediction, or excuse me, the National Weather Service, rather, in Kansas City, Pleasant Hill, they put out in their weather story the chances for snow as we go into tonight. And again, you'll notice that it was about a 20% of a trace of snow in Columbia. So again, not expecting really accumulation. As far as our probabilities of getting more than an inch of snow, 0. So again, not going to be a big deal, but is something that they did mention in their weather story there from the National Weather Service. Again, that was in Kansas City and Pleasant Hill. As far as rainfall totals go across here in Missouri. So again, as we mentioned, a few inches of rain is going to be possible, especially as we get towards the end of the week, as we go into Thursday and Friday, as well as across Wisconsin and Michigan. Lighter rainfall totals as you go across the Central Plains, where we could even be dealing with some snow, as we already mentioned, across that region here. What about our flood concerns from the Weather Prediction Center, showing that there is a marginal risk across the northern portion of the region? So again, our northern counties, that's where we're going to have the highest chance for heavy rain as we go towards the end of the week. This is going to be for Thursday. So this is your Thursday flood outlook here. So Thursday flood outlook, not Friday. I think I said Friday. It was actually Thursday is what we're going to be dealing with here with that marginal risk for flooding as we go into Thursday with some of those heavier rainfall totals that'll be moving through. All right, now we're going to go into your short-term temperature outlook. So again, we're kind of starting off the week a little bit below average. Then we will start to average out as we go towards Tuesday and Wednesday. Then you'll notice above average temperatures returning towards the end of this week with those rainfall chances. And then this will be sticking with us as we go through the next several days and even into next week. As you'll see, that 6 to 10 day temperature outlook issued yesterday puts us in that above average category here. So again, April 11th through the 15th, much above average for the majority of the country is expected. Precipitation will also be staying above average, not only as we go towards the later part of this week, but even into the first part of next week. So through the middle of the month, staying active here. What about 8 to 14 days all the way through April 19th? We're going to be dealing with above average temperatures. And then as far as precipitation, staying slightly above average. The exception is going to be across southeastern part of the U.S. Again, this is very welcome news here out west, where we certainly need the rainfall across this region if we're going to make it through this summer. So that is something that we're concerned about. So hopefully that will help things out. And then temperatures return a little bit closer to average for this time of year as we go towards the later part of the month. So maybe a little bit of a cool down as we go in the later weeks of April. So that's something we'll be watching for. This, of course, is your week 3 and 4 temperature outlook. So something that we're watching for in the long range. As far as precipitation goes, not a whole lot of confidence on our precipitation outlook for the end of the month. So we'll have to see how things shake out as we get a little bit closer to that. But in the near term, there certainly is confidence here with NOAA putting, this is from the hazards outlook from the Climate Prediction Center, NOAA putting out that moderate risk for heavy precipitation as we go into April 13th. So again, as we go into the early part of next week, likely dealing with some heavy amounts of precipitation. So this active pattern will be sticking with us in the short term. But again, as far as we go into the long term, still a little bit of uncertainty with that. All right, well, that wraps things up for weather. Now we'll move into sports. So now we go ahead and we move into sports. Of course, yesterday was the final championship game between South Carolina and UCLA in March Madness. On the women's side of March Madness, UCLA coming up with the victory. 79-51 was the final score in that game. It was one of the biggest wins as far as margin goes that we have seen in quite some time when it comes to March Madness. Of course, this happened after the Final Four took place on Friday, where South Carolina defeated the defending champion, who had been on a 14-month win streak, 62-48. Of course, that is UConn, who had the 14-month win streak. Last time they had lost, again, as we mentioned, was February of 2025. They won all the way through the national championship game last year, but were defeated in the Final Four by South Carolina, who would then, go on to lose themselves to UCLA 79-51, as we mentioned. This came after South Carolina had a dramatic win in round one as far as points go, 103-34 against Southern. They then defeated USC 101-61 by 40 points. They then defeated South Carolina in the Sweet 16, 94-68. They also won 78-58 in the Elite Eight against TCU. And then again, as we mentioned, they did knock off the previously defending champions UConn 62-48, but then they did lose to UCLA 79-51. UCLA didn't necessarily have as great of a margin of win in their first game, but they did still have a very big win in their first round game against California Baptist, winning 96-43. They then defeated Oklahoma State 87-68 in round two. In the Sweet 16, they took down Minnesota 80-56 and then won against Duke in the Elite Eight 70-58. And then, as we mentioned, they barely defeated Texas in a very defensive game. 51-44 was the final score. Again, very low scoring game with the combined score less than 100 points. But then they did score 79 points against 51 against South Carolina, as we mentioned, in that championship game. Some other interesting information about this was UCLA's first NCAA championship victory, as they have never reached the final game before. Something else is that they had a dominant performance as they led the entire game, as they never trailed to South Carolina. And so we also know that UCLA held South Carolina, typically a top tier offensive team, to just 29% shooting and 51 points. Again, as we mentioned, South Carolina had 2 wins in March Madness of over 100 points. So the fact that they were held to 51 points is certainly very impressive as well. Something else that's pretty crazy is that UCLA managed to open with a 21-10 lead in the first quarter. And again, the South Carolina was really never able to come back from that point in time, as again, there was a 30-point margin towards the end of the third quarter. So again, this wasn't just, one of those games that started out really close for a while and then UCLA really ran away with it. They had the lead for quite some time, and they They led really the entire game, as we mentioned, and they had a very impressive lead for quite some time as well. So it wasn't even at the very end that that happened. So something else that we would say would be very impressive with that. So that, of course, was on the women's side of things. So congratulations to UCLA, certainly pulling up the upset, as we mentioned. South Carolina has been in the finals for the last several years, or at least has been in contention to win for the last several years. So UCLA never have made an appearance in the national championship game, winning against South Carolina. A very powerful offense is certainly quite an upset, especially to do it so by such margins. Well, later tonight, we have the national championship game that will be taking place on the men's side of things. That will actually be taking place in less than a couple of hours here from the time at which our weekly recap or weekly news, excuse me, is released here. We've got UConn #2. So again, as we mentioned, UConn did lose in the final four for women's, but they won in the final four for men's, taking down Illinois 71-62. That, of course, was after they defeated Duke in the Elite Eight by 1 point because of a last minute shot, a three-pointer that was scored with zero point 0.6 seconds left. That's how they made it into the final four. And then they defeated Illinois 71-62, as we mentioned, in the final four. So they will be in the national championship game, and their opponent will be Michigan. Michigan took down Arizona 91-73, and we know that Arizona, they certainly had quite a tough road to get here as they took down Arkansas 109-88 in the Sweet 16. They also defeated Purdue 79-64. Purdue's a very good team. Well, Arizona was able to defeat them in the Elite Eight before being defeated by Michigan 91-73, as we mentioned, in that Final Four game. Michigan has also been very dominant as they won 101-80 in the first round against Howard. They also defeated St. Louis 95-72 in the second round. In the Sweet 16, they defeated Alabama 90-77, and then in the Elite Eight, they defeated Tennessee 95-62. And so that's what secured their spot in the Final Four. But then they defeated Arizona 91-73, again setting up a matchup between UConn, who just recently lost in the Final Four in the women's side of things, and Michigan, as we mentioned, who recently defeated the #1 seed Arizona, coming from that West Regional. So we'll see exactly what happens with that. Of course, the game, as we mentioned tonight, happening at 8:50 p.m. Eastern Time, but that pregame already underway. You can watch this game on TBS, TNT, and True TV. So that's where you can watch the game. Or, of course, if you secured a spot in person, then you'd be going to Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis, Indiana, because that's where the game is going to be at. As we mentioned, Phoenix is actually where the championship game yesterday and the Final Four on Friday was in the women's side of things. But the men's side of things, the championship game will be in Indianapolis, Indiana, as we mentioned there at Lucas Oil Stadium. So that's where we have that coming into play. As far as the record, Michigan is 36-3, UConn 34-5. So that's what their records are from the regular season. So something else that we're going to be watching as we go into the game tonight, Michigan does have a very powerful offense, and UConn has an elite defense. So this will certainly be quite a matchup. So that is something that we'll have to be watching for as well. Something else is if we look at AI has actually made a prediction as to what the final score will be. AI's prediction, the Ken Palm projection is that Michigan will win 77-70 against UConn. Again, that is just a prediction from AI. So, obviously the score will probably be different. It might be somewhat similar to that, but that is, of course, something that we will be watching for. All right. So of course, that's what's going to be going on tonight with the national championship game in men's college basketball. Well, we've got the spring sports in college are also heating up. Over the weekend, we had quite a few matchups in softball. We had Alabama knocking off #1 Texas. Of course, that was a really big victory that took place. They won 7-4 in a victory on Saturday. And now, of course, Alabama, they also won the final two games of the series. That, of course, was a pretty big deal. Arkansas also dominated Auburn, so they secured a series win, including a 4-0 shutout on April 5th, so yesterday. And then they also won 10-0 on Saturday, where Robin Heron pitched an 8 strikeout complete game. So we also had quite a few comebacks with Oregon coming back against Iowa. Oregon pulled off a 14-13 comeback win over Iowa on April 4th. So that was very impressive. And then we also had Missouri winning 1-0 in a very defensive game that I was actually in person for this past Saturday that took place against LSU. LSU had won against Missouri by quite a substantial amount in both Thursday and Friday games, but then Mizzou was able to come back and win in a shutout 1-0. And so again, I was in attendance for that game. It was certainly quite a bit of energy was felt within that stadium in a very close and defensive game that there was. There were several very impressive double plays that Mizzou did. So again, their defense certainly stood out in that game. All right, well, that is just some of the highlights from college softball. Of course, we also have a few big matchups coming up later this week, as we've got the Frozen Four that we've been talking about here. We've got Wisconsin taking on North Dakota, excuse me, in the semifinals. And then on the other side of the bracket, we have number one Michigan taking on Denver. So then right behind that, we've got Michigan and Denver. That game is going to be at 7:30. The national championship game will be at 4:30 in the afternoon this coming Sunday. Excuse me, that's going to be this coming Saturday. So Saturday, April 11th at 4:30 is when the national championship game will be in Division One men's ice hockey. So again, that Frozen Four is going to be happening coming up here on Thursday. So that, of course, will determine who will be moving into that championship game. The Frozen Four matchup can be found on ESPN2. So ESPN2, you can watch that. Of course, you can also watch it on ESPN Plus for when it comes to that streaming services. So again, streaming, you can watch it on ESPN Plus, or you can watch it on ESPN2. Again, both of those Frozen Four games will be taking place on Thursday afternoon. All right, so that does conclude things here for our GWP Weekly News. Have a great week, and we'll see you back here next time on GWP Weekly News. Thanks for tuning in.